Hi everybody, it's the start of a new week and today is Monday in the 33rd week in Ordinary Time. We are also starting a new book that we're going to study. Perhaps for me a little tough book because I've never taught it before, and so I have begun studying the book of Revelation. Today we are going to do chapter 1 verse 1 to 4 and chapter 2 verse 1 to 5a. So I want to look today at what is the message of the book of Revelation. That's what I'd like to share with you. Now, I'm going to read the text for you, but I'm going to recommend that if you want to study this book with me, because there are large gaps in our daily readings, I recommend that you read at least 2 or 3 chapters at a time. So if today you could cover chapters 1 to 3 and then read it again after the teaching. So that's very important, that we read the text first and then understand the context. If you're just going to listen to these teachings, especially when it comes to the book of Revelation, you're going to find it extremely difficult because the language, the style, the meanings are very heavy. So read the text, it will always help you to understand the commentary better. Let's read the text first. The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants what must soon take place. He made it known by sending his angel to his servant John, who testified to the word of God and to the testimony of Jesus Christ, even to all that he saw. Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of the prophecy, and blessed are those who hear and who keep what is written in it, for the time is near. John, to the 7 churches that are in Asia. Grace to you and peace from him who is and who was and who is to come, and from the 7 spirits who are before his throne. Now chapter 2 verse 1 to 5a. To the angel of the church in Ephesus write, these are the words to him who holds the 7 stars in his hands and who walks among the 7 golden lampstands. I know your works, your toil, and your patient endurance. I know that you cannot tolerate evildoers. You have tested those who claim to be apostles but are not, and have found them to be false. I also know that you are enduring patiently and bearing up for the sake of my name, and that you have not grown weary. But I have this against you, that you have abandoned the love you had at first. Remember then from what you have fallen. Repent and do the works you did at first. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Now, I want to tackle straight away this book and give you a bit of the background, because if you don't read this book in its context, my gosh, it can just become the most bizarre experience for many people, because then you begin to take this book literally and you start searching for meanings in the world today to see if this book is a fulfillment of some kind of doomsday prophecy. Okay, so let's understand the book straight away. The word revelation, referring to the last book of the New Testament, is a translation of the Greek word apocalypse. That's why this book is also called the book of Apocalypse, because it's simply a translation. Apocalypse, translated into English, has been translated as revelation. Now, when we speak of apocalypse as a term in Greek, apocalypse literally means to pull the lid off something, that is to reveal something. So this book is going to reveal something. The 22 chapters of this book are filled from the beginning to the end, as we heard today: golden lampstands, stars in your hands, etc., etc., 24 elders. The 22 chapters of this book are filled with symbolic descriptions. Now, as I said, sadly, many have approached this book as a roadmap for reading its alleged hidden secrets about the end of the world. Now, let me say this plainly, and I'm being very clear about this, irrespective of what you will hear on several YouTube channels, lots of Pentecostal groups, etc., etc. The symbolic descriptions in this book are not to be taken literally, nor is the symbolism meant to be pictured realistically. Can I say that clearly? The descriptions in this book are not to be taken literally, nor is the symbolism meant to be pictured realistically. Now, one would find it, if you do this, if you take it to be realistic, then one would find it difficult, if not repulsive, to visualize a lamb with 7 horns and then 7 eyes. Yeah? Yet Jesus Christ is described in precisely such words in Revelation chapter 5 verse 6. Yeah? Just the thought of how we picture Jesus, and now the lamb with 7 horns and 7 eyes sounds extremely repulsive. Now, before we answer when and by whom was this book written, we must understand why was it written. And when you understand why it was written, then you'll understand the who and the what and everything else. So, like the book of Daniel and other apocalyptic books, so Revelation is one of the many apocalyptic books, Daniel is an apocalyptic book. So, apocalyptic books were written, they were composed really as resistance literature. Resistance in the face of some crisis, usually a persecution. So, teaching people to resist the oppression of the faith that is coming from an outside group. Please understand this very clearly. Apocalyptic literature is generally resistance literature. Now, in the early part of the year 60 AD, the emperor, the Roman Emperor Nero, he began a violent persecution of Christians in Rome. We know this because Peter and Paul both were martyred under Nero. But this persecution that was begun by Nero was restricted to Rome. It had nothing to do with the issue of the worship of the emperor, which the Roman emperors were worshipped also as gods. Now, the first emperor who appears to have tried to compel Christians to participate in what was called the Caesar worship, the worship of the emperor, the Roman emperor as God. It was called Caesar worship. The first emperor who did this was the emperor Domitian. Now, Domitian was around the year 81 to 96 AD, and Domitian was a very fierce persecutor of the Christians. Now, clearly, the Roman imperial authorities were attempting to revive and to enforce this cult of the emperor worship. The church, of course, resisted, and as a consequence, it led to a ruthless persecution of the early church. Rome, if you know, if you ever go to Rome, and they'll tell you this in Rome, that Rome is a city built on 7 hills. And you'll find a mention of this in Revelation chapter 17 verse 9, the 7 hills. So Rome in the book, therefore, because now remember, it's being written, as I will tell you, on the island of Patmos by John, about the persecution that Rome is inflicting upon the Christians. The persecutors are Romans. So Rome, which is the city of 7 hills, is now portrayed in Revelation 17 verse 9 as the harlot or the prostitute, the harlot nation Babylon. Why? Because you can't go out and say, I want to say this to Rome, Rome, you are a harlot, you'll have your head knocked off. But if I said, the city of Babylon that sits on 7 hills, yeah, is a harlot, somebody will say, Babylon doesn't have 7 hills, and then they'll say, oh, I understand what you're saying. You're talking about the city that's built on 7 hills. What city is that? Rome. And Rome has begun to behave like the Babylon of the Old Testament, and you make the connection. Can you see now how the book was written? So John pictures the Roman Empire as a 7-headed beast rising out of the sea. You'll see this in chapter 13 verse 1. the seven-headed beast. Now, the imperial priesthood, when I say imperial priesthood, I'm talking about the Roman priesthood, is represented in Revelations as the second beast, having two horns like the lamb. It pretends, it simulates the Messiah, pretends to look like the Messiah, but you can identify because it has the voice of a dragon, and therefore it's betraying its satanic origin. So you'll see the book of Revelation is saying that there will be those who masquerade as the lamb, but it is really the evil one. Look carefully, it will say. Yeah, don't fall for everything. It's a book of warning. It's warning all its people around. Be careful, be careful. Do not fall. Do not succumb. Do not give in. Do not be an apostate. Do not fall for their religion and start worshipping and saying, it's okay, everything is fine, because that's what many people do even till today. So, working great signs and imposing economic sanctions, this devil, this demon, Rome, endeavors to force the universal observance of this Caesar worship. And we see this in chapter 13, verse 11 to 17. Now, coming to the date of the book in its present form, it was probably at the end, this book was written at the end of Domitian's reign, between the years 81 and 96. So towards the end, perhaps almost towards the turn of the century, this book of Revelation was written. Now, I'm saying this clearly, it is not written for a time to come, it was written for that time to tell them of what would happen in their immediate future. Are there applications for today? Yes. Can we see certain things happening today and make a connection? Yes. But understand why a book is principally written. Okay? Now, the second very difficult issue to deal with is that the author of this book calls himself John. Okay, you'll see this in the opening lines of today's teaching in Revelation chapter 1, verse 1. So, sending his angel to his servant John. You'll find it also in verse 4. You'll find it in verse 9, and then towards the end of the book in chapter 22, verse 8. So, the author of the book calls himself John, who, because of his Christian faith, obviously was exiled to a rocky island of Patmos. Okay, this book was written on the island of Patmos. Patmos was a Roman penal colony. It was like how the British sent people to punish them during the British Raj, send them off to the Andamans. The Andamans was a penal colony. Patmos was also a penal colony. Now, although he never claims, the author never claims to be John the Beloved or John the Apostle, whose name is attached to the fourth gospel, the author was identified by several of the early church fathers as John the Apostle. Most probably he was, scholars say he was a Palestinian born Jew who had fled into exile. He was a prophetic figure known to the churches in the region of Asia Minor, modern day Turkey. So there is no clarity that the author of Revelation is John the Apostle. It is some John, but we do not know. That is the reason why when you read my text form, so I do the same teaching in a text form so that you can use it for study material. Go to pottypadre.com, type the Revelations, the book of Revelations in search, and you'll find this article. So whenever I write in this article the word John, I will put John in inverted commas because it's not John the Apostle, but this John whose identity we don't know. Now, John, who wrote this book, he wrote it with two purposes in mind, and keep this in mind because this is what is going to help you to understand this book. First is to encourage the faithful to remain faithful, that is, to endure. In Greek, the word is hypomone, to endure. Now, endure what? Endure the persecution that was being imposed by them, where they were being forced to worship the emperor as Dominus, yeah, which translates as the Lord. That is why we will say Jesus is the Lord. The early Christians said Jesus is Lord, not the emperor is Lord, as they had to do. Now, the other reason why this book was written was to urge those who had left the faith and who were very accommodating to Rome, said, okay, it's all right, we'll go and do a little puja here and a puja there. What's the big deal? The book is written to them to say, please repent. Repent. What you're doing is wrong. Yeah? You are accommodating and deviating from your faith. And I must tell you with great sadness, I find many, many, many Catholics who are doing this today. Yeah, and they think it is okay. Yeah, I also get sometimes most bizarre questions. Recently, people ask me, Father, can I wish another person happy Diwali? Yes, of course. Cultural exchanges, exchange of sweet, exchange of food which is not offered to an idol, fine, there is no problem. Nobody is restricting you and asking you to not interact with the world. I don't know how some would even experience a trip to Ajanta and Ellora caves. I love art, I love history. Worship of another religion is one thing which we should not do, which some people do. Yeah, and then they come to church and they think, anything goes. I went to church, I went here, mixed marriages, weddings. Yeah, I get married in the Hindu rite, not permitted. Yeah, I get married and then I come to church and get married because I want to make both happy. I'm sorry, church teaching doesn't allow this. I don't know, maybe some priests, but definitely not church teaching. So, too many Christians at that time went along with idolatry, with injustice and the violence that the Roman Empire perpetuated. And many abandoned their Christian faith and they began to participate in this imperial cult, worshipping the emperor. They also began to participate in other activities that were related to the empire. So the book was written to encourage also these lapsed Christians to come out of this evil empire and become part of the movement towards the New Jerusalem. So this is why the book is written. No other reason. Please don't imagine another reason. These doomsday and end of the world and God knows what all. Please take it in the measure that it was written and the reason why this book was written. Now, as a consequence of this decision of not worshipping the emperor, the early Christians would endure hardships. Difficult days were ahead, as the faithful very clearly in the book would also have to live through the violent collapse of the empire. So clearly John, the author John of the book of Revelation, he anticipated that persecution would increase in the near future. So the book is clearly an exhortation, an encouragement, it's an admonition to Christians of the first century to do what? Stand firm in the faith, to avoid compromise with paganism. Despite the threat of adversity, despite even the fact that they would lose their life and be martyred, they were to await patiently the fulfillment of God's mighty promises. That's why you'll see God described in all his glory on the throne, seated there with rays of red and white and 24 elders sitting around and 4 cherubs around with many eyes. All this is to show the majesty of God, to say to the people in the book of Revelation, to those who are struggling, don't think that the emperor is great. Our God is great. He is mightier and nothing is impossible. Wait on his promises. You might have to give your life, but that's okay. Don't compromise with your faith. Now, in today's text, the author addresses 7 churches, or rather from chapter 2 and in chapter 3, the author will address 7 churches or communities in 7 different cities in the Roman provinces of Asia, which is today the western part of Turkey. So there were 7 churches in the western part of Turkey, and you will see that John begins addressing these 7 churches. If you look at a map, and I put it out in the text format today on pottypadre.com, the 7 churches were located about 80 kilometers apart from each other. And they formed, if you look at them roughly, they form a circle around the city of Ephesus along the coast. Now, The cities which gave their names to these churches, and you will see that all the names are mentioned. You will find it in chapter 1, verses 11. So the cities are mentioned there. The 7 churches: to Ephesus, Smyrna, to Pergamum, to Thyatira, to Sardis, to Philadelphia, and to Laodicea. So these are the 7 churches. Now John begins with an address and a greeting which makes use of many Old Testament allusions suggesting the glorious return of the Messiah and his future reign over God's people in fulfillment of the promises that were made to King David. Now this is basically what the whole book is about, and only part of this greeting is included in our reading, because today is the first reading is taken from chapter 1, verse 1 to 4. Only part of the introduction is included. Now the text of today begins by addressing the first of the 7 churches. Look at chapter 2, verse 1, and that is Ephesus. Ephesus was the largest, the biggest of the 7 churches. It was also the capital of this province of Asia Minor. Now the message comes from the one who holds the 7 stars. Look at chapter 2, verse 1. The one who holds 7 stars in his right hand. Who is that? It is the Son of Man. And we are told that the Son of Man, who is giving this message, holding the 7 stars, is a man who is surrounded by 7 golden lampstands. The 7 golden lampstands, we are told in the text itself what these are. We don't have to guess. Are the 7 churches of Ephesus. So Jesus is addressing the 7 churches one by one, and John begins with the church of Ephesus. Now John begins by praising the Ephesians. So if you see the first part, verse 4 onwards, he says, I know your works, your toil, your patient endurance. He commends the way they have endured hardships in living their faith, and also he commends them, if you'll see, for exposing. I know that you cannot tolerate evildoers. They have exposed false teachers who are posing as apostles. However, John also regrets that the Ephesians now show less love and enthusiasm for the faith than before. And this includes both their love for Christ and their love for each other, he says. So he concludes by encouraging them to go back to their first fervor. He says they should remember their earlier sinful state from which they had come now, and return to that high standard they had set themselves at the time of their first conversion. And that goes for a lot of us. You know, we tend to slide back into a bad spiritual life. We go for a retreat, we come back, we are all pumped up, and then we slide back. And John is reminding the church, he says, it's not that you don't love God, but your love has grown dim. In fact, when we do one of the other churches, I think it is Sardis or I think it is Sardis. It's the church of Laodicea. He will tell them, you all have become lukewarm. I'm going to spit you out of my mouth. We'll do that tomorrow. Now, clearly the Ephesians are told that if they do not change their ways, the elder will come and remove their lampstand. That is, the elder will come and remove their status as a Christian community. If they continue as they are now, they are no longer, says John, you are no longer going to be shining the light of Christ to the world around you. So he is warning them. He says, you were good, some of you still are good, but your love for Jesus Christ, love for one another has diminished. Now, this book has great relevance for us even today. You know, many parts of our own nation face persecution directly, and what I think is most subtle is the indirect persecution. Several laws are introduced under the guise of prevention of forced conversion, and then these are used against the church, used against us in our calling to evangelize. Many Christians, laity, religious leaders very often sadly choose to be silent, and perhaps some I hope not, but I sense some are even complicit with government in permitting the suppression of the faith by not opposing it, if not vociferously, at least by some token opposition. There are bishops I've seen, the image of Bishop Bernard Moras in Karnataka burns brightly in my heart when there were attacks on the Christians, and I remember at that point of time the chief minister went to see Bishop Moras. I remember him wagging his finger at the chief minister, and I said, good going, good going. Tell them, because we cannot allow politicians to be complicit. Yeah, there are riots sometimes in our nations. There is silence from government for 4 days, 5 days, and then you hear the voice of the Prime Minister. Why are we not hearing it as quickly as he tweets? And we have to ask these questions. They are uncomfortable questions. People may not like what we are saying, what I'm saying, but this is the truth. So persecutors of the Christian faith should remember also that many such human tyrants had hoped for the end of the church, but they met their end here on earth. Christ and his church will always remain triumphant. So I'm inviting you to study this book. I know today is a long teaching, but these are going to be long teachings because I need to explain to you what is the true meaning of this book, so that you are not hijacked by some Pentecostal groups, understanding of the rapture, etc., etc. Yes, Christ has died, Christ is risen, Christ will come again. He will come to judge the living and the dead. Let us see what this book says. So let's not make too much of this book. And I must confess that while I was reluctant to begin with this book, I am happy in many ways that I have been doing my own study of this book. And please, what I'm giving you is a Catholic study of this book. So I know many people watching this channel are also reading up and watching several other channels. Please don't allow, and when I say other channels, if they are Catholic, please, yes, please watch. I'm as much as you want to watch. But there are several Pentecostal Protestant groups who give you their own versions of most of the books in the New Testament. Watch carefully, especially when they are teaching St. Paul's letters. Be very, very careful because their interpretations very often, in fact, even their texts, yeah, if you watch very carefully, have been altered to suit their message that they want to give. So God bless you all. I'll see you again tomorrow. We continue with our study of the book of Revelation, and we'll do this for roughly the next 2 weeks till we celebrate the end of this liturgical year with the feast of Christ the King, and then step into the season of Advent. Bye everybody. I'll see you tomorrow. Don't forget, like this video, especially if you really liked it, and share it with your friends. Encourage other Catholics to study these books. If you're new to our channel, please subscribe to this channel and hit that notification button so that every time I post, which is sometimes twice a day or thrice a day, if I post something, you will automatically be notified. For those of you who would like to go to my my blog page, it is pottypadre.com, pottypadre.com. If you're wondering why such a curious name, there's a section called About Me. Go and read it and you'll understand why it is. I'll see you tomorrow at 9 o'clock.